Hello, Politics Plus Media 101 listeners. Today we have a show on baseball with The Athletic's Evan Drellich and author of Winning Fixes Everything. Today's story, you may be asking, why is a politics and media show doing a topic on baseball? Well, it's because baseball is experiencing a renaissance of sorts, with attendance being up 9% year over year, the largest increase according to Major League Baseball since 1998. TV ratings are up, with ESPN viewership being up roughly 1.51 million viewers to 1.41 million viewers a year ago at this time. And allegedly, the game's viewership is getting younger. So it seems like something is going on in baseball, and we have brought on Evan Drellich, probably the best person to walk us through what is going on. So Evan, the elephant in the room here is that baseball has undertaken some dramatic new rule changes. Do you think these rules, from the pitch clock to the throw-over rules where athleticism is enhanced and the speed of the game and the moments of the game are more compact, is that the reason why attendance is up, or is the spike due to something else?
I asked the commissioner this, whatever the day his reelection was. This would have been probably 2 weeks ago at this point. And he himself attributed it to more than just the rule changes. But I think the league has certainly positioned the rule changes. And I think the evidence backs up that, yeah, the rule changes have been a significant contributor to this rise in business metrics, or whatever you want to call it. The amount of consumption that we're seeing, whether that's people watching at home, whether that's attendance. There's been a bunch of different notes MLB has sent out this year about, we've had the best weekend or the best Tuesday in June since XYZ year. There's been a lot of that this year. And I wear my skeptical hat daily. And sometimes I start to wonder, well, all right, how much of this is really the rules? But I think even if you take a little bit of a skeptical approach to all the numbers and things that you're seeing about the game, I still think there's a pretty clear turnaround or at least uptick this year that you're seeing. The rules undoubtedly have worked on the field as they wanted it to. You put in a pitch clock to make games faster. Games are faster. And then you have that second level question. Now the games are faster. Are people enjoying it more? Are they more drawn to it? It does seem like the answer is yes. I think in my heart of hearts, I'm not convinced that baseball is now exactly where it wants to be, or that this is kind of captured an entire new generation because of the clock. It has been a help. It's been an improvement. It was good that MLB was willing to try something new, to try to change something. What's the worst that happens? It's a disaster. Then you go back to the old way. It was time to try to reinstill some action in the game. But there's still a lot of strikeouts. 100 miles per hour is kind of everywhere and not as exciting as it used to be. You could still imagine a version of baseball that has more action. I'm not sure how you get there. So I think it's improved, is what I'm saying. I don't think we've solved it or the commissioner solved it, but I think it's a step forward.
So, Evan, could you help us understand how significant these rule changes actually are by putting them in the context of the grand scheme of baseball history and sports history? We talk in baseball about the live ball era, and then in basketball about the shot clock era. And it's kind of a line in the sand on history before and after. Do you think that this is one of those moments? Are these rule changes as significant as those other big moments in history?
I think objectively, you haven't had many seasons in baseball that have contained this large a change to the on-field play of the sport. The lowering of the mound in, was it 68, was going into 69, I think was the first. 68 was the last year that I believe it was before it was lowered. And then 69 was the first year that it had been lowered, if I'm remembering right. The introduction of the designated hitter, as you point out, you're kind of going into the live ball era. There's not a ton of these things that you would line up. And I think over time, people would look back and go, adding a clock to a sport that for a very long time touted how it didn't have a clock is a very big deal. Just fundamentally, this is baseball. It's a national pastime. We don't want it to change. And people have always been averse to change and all that type of stuff. So yeah, I think history will show it to be a big deal. It's interesting for me. I don't watch as much on the field as I used to. I used to be a beat writer who would go to all the games for whatever team I'm covering, or not all of them, but most of them, many of them, a lot of them. And, when I watch games this year, my attention span isn't always the greatest to begin with. And I actually find that the faster games now, where I inherently will lose my focus for 30 seconds to who knows how many minutes, and I'll look down and be like, what happened? Where did the game go? And so I'm oddly, I think personally, me, Evan, somebody who actually kind of liked a little bit of that more variable, slower cadence, so that when I did turn away for a bit, I just didn't miss quite as much. Like it's almost a tiny bit more frenetic in experience now for me. So, I didn't like, when I was going to all the games, being there for 4 hours every night or 3+. The decrease in the length of time of games, I think, is a positive no matter what. But there's a part of me that actually misses a little bit calmer pace sometimes. Just, a little, take a deep breath, look around, and you might not have actually missed a pitch, but now you're going to miss a pitch. So that's me griping on a personal level, while everything I said before about the net positive still remains.
So I played college baseball for a year, and this is the first year I have watched baseball almost every single day because of the rule changes. Not only is it the shortening,
it's a different experience for you then.
It's a totally different experience, and it's more similar to college baseball or high school baseball, where you're getting on the mound and you're going. And I think what's really beautiful about the pitch clock, and I'm kind of like spitballing here, Evan, is, to me, what made baseball beautiful before the pitch clock is you had a slow buildup. And the slow buildup would turn into these majestic moments, right? You have a pitcher losing his mind. He walks the bases loaded. Then you have a grand slam. The difference is, instead of that taking 30 minutes to transpire, we still get that same amount of buildup in 10 minutes, maybe. And the crowd and the energy is able to be sustained. And it's almost like a football game where you have a long drive that culminates in a touchdown. So I personally think it's beautiful. I think another aspect of these rules that is very important for the sport, and you can see it around the hype with stars like maybe Jaron Duran or Ellie De La Cruz. For our listeners, those are young players who kind of buck the mold of the steroid era baseball player, where they are exciting because they are brilliantly fast and athletic. And there's a rule where pitchers can only throw over, I think it's 2 times before the last time they need to either pick them off or the runner gets second. So it incentivizes stolen bases, and you're getting to see the athleticism, maybe a little bit more small ball, where these superstar athletes are now able to showcase their abilities. And I was wondering, you mentioned baseball's kind of almost there, but there's still some tinkering to be done. Do you have any inside view on what that tinkering is, and if it would be something to accentuate the athleticism in the game, to maybe be more small ball as opposed to those strikeouts and home runs? Or is everything kind of on the cutting board and they're just brainstorming?
The only one I've heard talked about and kind of reported on that seems to consistently come up is the automated strike zone, the possibility of using lasers and technology to either help umpires call every pitch or to give teams 3 challenges a game. You can say, you got that call wrong. Everything that MLB has suggested thus far is that they favor the challenge system, where you don't have this taking over and replacing the umpire on every play at the major league level, but you would give teams the ability to challenge. That, it seems, is still a possibility for 2024. It's kind of hard to tell. Sometimes they put together this new committee to deal with these rule changes, and ultimately MLB controls that committee. They have the votes to push through what they want, but there is a sense, at least publicly, of them wanting to make players and people feel heard. And so if they've decided they're going to do that for next year, they're not tipping their hand publicly. In fact, Rob Manfred, the commissioner, said stuff kind of suggesting they really do have a lot more work to do here. So if you take him at his word, it's no slam dunk for next year. Beyond that, there might be things that have been talked about that I'm just not remembering right now. But there's also a sense of we made so many changes for this year. You don't want every year to look like this year in terms of the alterations. This was a huge lift for people, for players, for staff, for umpires, for now the people who are running the pitch clock and making sure that goes on time. One too many nip and tuck, it starts to not look too good. So I think they're being cognizant of that, and they should be. And I imagine if there are alterations for next year, it will not be as heavy as this. Could there be in the next 3 to 4 or 5 years more coming? Maybe. But I can't sit here and tell you I know what they'll be. Me personally, I was asked this the other day. When I was growing up, 100 miles per hour meant something. And it was really extraordinary to see Billy Wagner, Randy Johnson. And I do wonder if there is some way to kind of counteract pitching. And I don't know if that's lowering the mound. I don't know if that's something with the fences. That would be where my mind would go. I could be wrong. I could have a terrible idea. It's very rare, but it does happen. But that would be my thought is there some way to kind of lessen the effectiveness of pitching? Because the strikeout ability that pitchers have is remains extraordinary, even though there's more action now. You haven't really solved that problem, the putting the ball in play problem.
And this is just a spitball, Evan, and I want your opinion on this. I just thought of this now. What about something like tinkering the rules where if you bunt with 2 strikes, it's a foul ball? So you're incentivizing a hitter to bunt with 2 strikes, especially if they have speed. You're cutting down on the strikeouts potentially, and you're infusing that speed and athleticism.
Like all these, you'd be fighting the traditionalists. And I don't know that I consider myself a traditionalist. I did like not having the DH. Now that it's gone, I don't really care about it. Sometimes I miss, I think to myself, it'd be nice to have it back. I think if part of the attachment to baseball is this attachment to childhood and what the game used to look like, the more you start to change the game, the more divorced it is from what people remember about it. But you can make that argument anytime you're making a change. If that's your argument, you're probably never going to make a change. And so could you do? I mean, that seems relatively small to me. I don't think that's a bad idea. Or one that couldn't possibly be discussed. I haven't heard it before. Maybe I missed it. You tell me if that's been out there. But sure, it's hard to say where should you draw the line between keeping baseball looking the same as it did over time, because again, there were major changes here, but I don't think you're going to have many people who are picketing outside of MLB over a 2-strike bunt rule, although people surprise you sometimes.
Yeah, I think Justin is just spitting out these ideas because he's trying to use this episode as a way to get a job with the MLB. He's got all kinds of ideas that you can hear about. But it's funny as you guys are talking about your different experiences with the new rules, because I feel like I empathize really with both of you, but in different settings. So, Evan, what you're saying about the enjoyable, slow pace of the game and its former form, I mean, that's kind of the way that I've felt about the experience in the stadium. Since I moved back to the States, I've gone to a baseball game at least once every year. Justin goes more than me. And when I went this year, I noticed that the game went almost uncomfortably quickly. I'd paid for a full ticket and I was planning to have at least a couple of beers and a hot dog, and there was barely enough time for that. And then we were all cramming into the T in Boston and trying to find our way home much earlier than we expected. But I think that watching the game on television is really a much, much better experience now with the new rules, because the slow pace of the game made for such a bad TV viewing experience. So it seems as though these decisions were really to prioritize the shape of the game in television, and for the television consumer, maybe to some extent at the expense of the match attendant. Evan, can you talk about that? How does the league think about in-person versus television? Which one is the priority? And how important is each one of those experiences to the bottom line for the business?
Well, I talked to Rob Manfred about this 4 years ago. Kind of a larger story I did at the time about how healthy is baseball. And he described it as really two businesses: the in-person experience and the out of the viewing at home, whatever, or on the go, through your phone or whatever, however you're watching it, not at the stadium. I wish I had some of those numbers breakdowns that came up during some of the labor disputes in front of me, but there's a lot of money attached to both. I forget the split. It is possible to hone in a little bit on what that split is, but I think you're seeing now with all the hand wringing and kind of rightful worry in a lot of spots about the future of TV, that TV is very important. And when I say TV, I mean your ability to access the game, not at the stadium, whether that's on your phone, on your tablet, through cable, through your YouTube TV and your streaming services. There's a real shift in that landscape going on, and there's a lot of money in it. The cable model in baseball was really advantageous to teams, and it trickles down to everybody, to the players, because for a long time, cable was how people watched games before you had all the YouTube TVs. And whether or not you were a Yankees fan, if you lived in New York and you signed up for Time Warner Cable, you're getting Yankees games, and you are therefore paying for Yankees games. And now when you move away from a model like that, where everybody in the system is paying for it, to now, well, you can sign up for a month at a time, and then the next month cancel, then go back the next month. And it's just a whole different model that baseball's looking at. And it'll change some of the economics. They're trying to figure out what that's going to look like, what they want it to look like. MLB, or at least Rob Manfred, wants the game to be more national. Football is a national game. All the broadcasting rights are national. Baseball has traditionally been more of a local sport. The markets are very varied. It's really like this. It's the biggest looming question, I think, at the moment, or at least the most interesting one, is how does this all shake out? Is there an all 30 team MLB streaming service that you can sign up for no matter what market you're in? You're in Boston, you want to watch Red Sox games or any other team's games anytime. Doesn't matter where you are geographically. You sign up for this service and you can do it. I think that'd be great for fans. I think fans want it, but there's a lot of complications to creating that. So both in stadium and at home viewership are really important. A lot of money attached to both. And I just don't remember the exact split or an approximate split. One of them is a little bit more than the other.
There is obviously the rise of streaming and a decline of linear TV networks, and specifically regional sports networks. I think baseball, everything but football, has to deal with the decline of regional sports networks, right? So that's hockey, that's basketball, and that is baseball. I think baseball had a unique situation this year, Evan, and correct me if I'm wrong, where the Padres broadcast team basically went bankrupt, and baseball and the Padres had to figure out a solution on their own. So I guess the question is, can you just go into that a little bit and help us understand if baseball has any type of coherent plan that the owners and the commissioner have settled on to deal with the imminent collapse of many of these regional sports networks, or if they're just going to take it one collapse at a time kind of thing?
Yeah, it's the latter. It's one collapse at a time. And there's a lot of nuance to the situation, but the basic overview is that a little under half of the teams going into this year, their games were carried by an affiliate of, the name of the company was Diamond, but the networks are known as Bally Sports. The naming rights deal. So Bally is the channel, Bally whatever, Bally Southwest, Bally Sports, different name depending on the market. So about half of the teams had a Bally affiliation. Bally files for bankruptcy. They had bought these networks. These networks had once been owned by Fox, and they bought the networks with a huge amount of debt, and the debt became crippling as the cable model crumbled, and there was just less money going into the cable model. That they filed for bankruptcy does not necessarily mean that every single individual RSN is unprofitable. Some of them are more profitable than others. Some of them are more viable than others. Some of them are still paying the teams, right? These RSNs pay the teams for the rights to broadcast the games. The Padres stopped. They said, we're not going to pay you anymore. So at that point, the rights for the Padres games go back to the Padres. And what MLB did is they had prepared for this, and they broadcast the games themselves. And people can now, it's loosened up some of the restrictions around the games, right? It used to be that, you have to sign up for the cable provider that carried Bally. And if you lived in the San Diego area, if you lived in the territory of the Padres, the television territory, and now you don't. So if you're in downtown San Diego, you want to watch a Padres game on TV, but you don't subscribe to like YouTube TV, you don't subscribe to cable. Now you can just sign up for this package online and you can watch it that way. And that existed in a few places. You could do it with the Red Sox. It's expensive. You can do it with the Yankees. Some teams that doesn't exist yet. And so it's this complicated dance. What MLB ultimately wants is to make games more accessible, because it is kind of silly that you can, like I live in New York. I have YouTube TV. I don't get, when I signed up for YouTube TV, I used to get MLB Network, SNY, which is the Met station, and Yes, which is the Yankee station. I get none. I have now none of them. I'm not switching providers. I'm not going to go through that hassle. It would make sense that I could just sign up for one service through MLB or MLB and a partner like, I don't know, Apple, and be able to get all those games. But there's a lot of contractual rights that are mixed up in this. The kind of positive outcome for fans, if more of these Bally RSNs, go by the wayside, if they say, we're not paying you anymore, here are your rights back. Well, that might speed up the process of getting rights back to the teams and kind of loosening up the landscape to allow for more access. But it's a messy, complicated thing. It's blackouts, and fans have dealt with blackouts for a long time, and blackouts can mean a lot of different things. We could do 45 minutes on just like going through this. And I'm not, I am not the expert on this, but I have spent some time on it. And you hope in the next few years that the end result of this is that it's easier to watch games. That's the bottom line.
I have YouTube TV as well. They are not a sponsor for anybody listening to this show. It's just a really good service. And I cannot watch the Orioles.
If it was so good, I would have my SNY, my Yes, and my MLB. I'm kidding.
Exactly. I can't watch the Orioles, who are really hot right now. I can't watch the Nationals. I can't get MLB Network. It is beyond frustrating. So I wanted to echo that baseball, which is allegedly experiencing this rise in popularity, many young people can't even watch the sport, which is mind-blowing.
Well, and everybody's, it's a fractured landscape. Everybody's signed up for different services, and and on a serious note, I don't know enough about the carriage dispute to say who's being unreasonable here or not, right? Both sides have their price, what they're willing to pay or not. And this is common, but there's a lot of different places to catch baseball games now. Peacock, Apple, ESPN. It's an experimental time, but I don't know if it's making it easier for fans. And you hope you get to a place where it does get easier for fans. But, baseball has always been able to kind of rely on the fact, and sports in general, people are crazy about their teams. And it is the ultimate brand loyalty is sports. And so it kind of doesn't matter in most cases how badly you treat them, because they're going to be there because, God, they love their socks, right? I mean, it's just, it's interesting if you start thinking about it from kind of a pure business perspective of that's what it is. It's brand loyalty, and it doesn't matter what you do.
Well, Evan, when you're talking about that TV picture, I think you put your finger on what was so great about the cable model, which was the bundling, and that it was so ubiquitous that a viewer anywhere in the market, if they have a cable subscription, whether or not they're a baseball fan, if they've got the bundle, they're putting money into the sport. So, they're getting $1 out of the $80 that every single person in their household is putting into all of cable, bundled with ESPN, bundled with Home and Gardens and CNN and Fox. And if the plan, as you've suggested, is to pivot it to an a la carte subscription service where only baseball fans are subscribing, that's a scary concept. We've seen that movie play before. It's CNN and so on.
Let me give a look. It's not necessarily that would be the only way. It could be that would be a simulcast option, that you could still sign up for cable and get your games just as you do now, or YouTube TV if they carry it, Or you could do it this way, right? But there's a lot of exclusivity now that doesn't even allow for the option for MLB to pool these rights together. And then there's a whole other complicated issue of, well, teams like the Red Sox, the Yankees, the Dodgers, the big market teams have the most valuable TV rights. Why are they going to want to go into an all 30 thing where they're just propping up the teams that don't have those rights? And so there's this big owner versus owner thing to settle here, which, RSNs are probably not disappearing. Teams love getting guaranteed money and some money up front for anything. You're going to give me $70 million to broadcast my games? I'm probably still going to take it. It's just a matter of along with it, do other options develop? I don't think the RSN is at this point truly dead. And I'm sorry to cut you off. It's just, I didn't want it to sound like the only way you're going to be watching baseball games 5 years from now is through the Apple MLB all 30 team package. Yeah. That's not what I was trying to say. It's an alternative, but an important one.
Something that kind of came to mind there, Evan, was thinking of these other cases in media. And for Hollywood, the movie studios, when they started seeing this decline in relative ticket sales, maybe the gross was okay, but not so good when you adjust for inflation. When you look at the number of tickets sold, a lot of what they started doing was pivoting to the international markets where they were still seeing growth. And China was big, but there was a lot of growing markets where Hollywood kind of supplemented the decline in the States. And I'm wondering if baseball is thinking about that. I mean, I think we had that recent World Baseball Classic, which had more interest overseas than it had in previous editions. Did the commissioner's office and the team owners see international as a very important part of the picture?
Well, so remember I said earlier, the first question, that the commissioner felt when I talked to him 2 weeks ago at his reelection that there was more than just the new rules going on. One of the things he said then in terms of why are the business metrics up 2 weeks ago was he did feel like it started with last year's build up to the playoffs, into the WBC and the excitement around the WBC. So yeah, they do see that. The question that comes up in my head when you talk about that, though, MLB is very much competing with Netflix, with any form of entertainment you can get on your phone. MLB is a competitor to them now. And this is the trouble with capturing the younger generations is there's so many different ways they can be entertained quickly and easily rather than baseball. And so in some way, they are all in the same bucket. My question would be, well, is baseball as accessible or is kind of grabbing a format or medium as a movie or a television show? Like, is there just something inherently easier for movies to spread than a sport? I don't know the answer to that. I mean, somebody hits a ball, I guess that's pretty simple. You teach somebody the rules once, I guess they're in. So maybe they're on the same footing. Hollywood has the obvious advantage of having these massive stars that baseball, Shohei Ohtani being certainly in one part of the world, in one country specific, being a very big exception. It's a little tougher for baseball to have that kind of grab on people. But yeah, MLB would like to expand internationally. Is that the answer? My instinct is in the short term, I don't see it moving the needle that much, but maybe there are ways to monetize Ohtani and the Japanese interests that I'm not quite aware of that are brewing. It's possible.
And what I would say to you, Evan, is tribalism is a hell of a drug. We cover all aspects of it on this show, politics and media. And when you go with a bunch of friends who haven't watched the game before and you take them to Fenway or Yankee Stadium or Dodger Stadium and it's playing the Dodgers and Giants and there's that palpable hatred in the air and it's us versus them and, a ninth inning grand slam to win it all. It's pretty easy to kind of hook fans for life in that regard. On viewing parties for the playoffs and like the Super Bowl, right? That's pretty much how one of the reasons why the NFL spread is everybody was having a holiday where it would be your Super Bowl Sunday and you'd have all your parents would have their friends over and stuff like that. So I think that maybe that's an angle that the movies don't have. But you said movies have stars and baseball doesn't, and that's
not to the same level is my point.
You're right. You're right. Baseball. I would argue baseball doesn't have stars except for maybe Shohei Ohtani. And I want to get into that. The NBA with Michael Jordan, David Stern, everybody's probably watched documentaries. They revolutionized the way that they marketed the sport. The NFL marketed the sport around their quarterbacks primarily. Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes, you can go on and on and on. But it's primarily leagues upholding their superstars and driving all or most of the marketing around them. And you just don't see that with baseball. I don't know how much of that is just Mike Trout being a wet rag when he was supposed to be the best player maybe ever and just not wanting to be in the media attention, not having that great personality that people speak of. But Shohei Ohtani seems to have a great personality, great smile. He's in all of the media. Is Major League Baseball and specifically the commissioner's office trying to at least take what has been successful where they're holding up these stars, or is that just not in the cards?
Yeah, I think for years now, the conversation has been around. In fact, I think it was a little more prominent. Maybe now it's returning pre-pandemic. I remember 19, 18, kind of more Trout's prime years. This question of, does MLB know how to market its stars? And there have been changes in MLB's marketing department. I think there was an acknowledgement internally, inherently and otherwise, that they needed to be better, that they were not doing enough. I think that conversation's always going to exist a little bit in a way, like when I hear it now, it's like, yeah, we've been talking about this for years. You can see MLB almost trying too hard sometimes. You watch some of these hokey ideas and some of them land, sometimes I've smiled and laughed at the in-game interviews, but sometimes they're a little cringy and it's a little awkward. MLB's trying hard. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Whether they are doing the best that anybody could do, make your own decisions. But I think there's also the point that always gets brought up in this discussion, which is true. Football with quarterbacks, basketball in general, more individual. It's easier to focus on the individual. In baseball, and Ohtani does have an advantage here with the starting pitching, and he's hitting. But baseball, the guy can go 0 for 3, and he might get one fly ball hit to him the whole day. If the star player is a hitter like Mike Trout, so you don't have the ball in his hands so prominently the way you're guaranteed every night LeBron or whoever's on the floor is going to have the ball. It is more of a team game, I think, in function, and that can be a bit of a hurdle. And then you mix in personalities. Trout is more reserved. Ohtani, who's got the weight of an entire other country watching him. In Japan, I think there's a protectiveness that he has of himself. And so you don't have necessarily these really vibrant personalities showing up. Like there's no Dennis Rodman that I can point to. There's, there's nobody issuing these wild quotes that are kind of jaw dropping that make you go, that have that WWE style entertainment. The point I always go back to is pretty simple. People like stories. For stories, you have to have regular characters. You need a cast. There's been a lot of roster turnover in baseball. Pitchers are going in and out all the time. The starting pitcher isn't as much as an important thing as it used to be. They don't go long into games as they used to. Baseball hasn't done a great job, just by the way it's been played in this modern era of analytics, of producing its absolute best possible storylines, I don't think. And when it used to be heavyweight starting pitching matchups and you could expect guys to go 6 innings or 7 innings, I think it was easier when you knew that guy is your 7th inning guy. That is the role he plays, and he's going to have the ball in the 7th inning. It was a theatrical thing that played out every night. And now it's kind of a nameless, faceless parade of young, hard-throwing guys. And that's not exclusively true. There are certainly some guys who do create storylines. The Jose Ramirez, Tim Anderson boxing match the other day. But that's what it takes, right? It's an interesting state for baseball when it takes one player decking another player to kind of make people pause and go, let me rewatch that 10 times. And that's what a fight does. I don't know that a ton else in baseball does that. And that's kind of too bad.
Evan, I remember that there were some pundits in the baseball world who commented that Ohtani's marketability and his popularity might be inhibited by his inability to speak English, or that English wasn't his first language. And I think there was quite a bit of criticism of the pundits that were suggesting this as a problem, because it seemed as though they were saying that it was a problem that the player came from a different country and spoke a different language. And I certainly remember, 25 years ago when Ichiro came into the MLB and was an iconic player, a popular player, despite the fact that his first language wasn't English. I want to know, though, if you think the commissioner's office and the people who run the league do think about things that way.
I haven't asked that question directly. I mean, just as a matter of logic, if the U.S.-based press, mostly English speaking, is, and this is the language that they're primarily writing in and disseminating their work to their readers in, is interviewing a player who is most comfortable speaking in a different language, whether that's Japanese or Spanish or whatever. There's a translator there. And so you pretty instantly get the English part of it. It's not as though the player speaking Japanese are like, oh, well, we have no idea what he's saying. How could we possibly know what's on their mind, right? That's not actually a problem. I think it more becomes a question of, do they say anything that's grabbing or interesting? And with no bearing on where they're from, right? Whether it is said in English or it is translated from another language, the real question is, are they compelling in what they're saying? And I do think that matters, whether people are interesting. And I think a lot of executives in baseball are god awfully boring. I don't think it helps. I think it's, there's some people I talk to in the sport, and I've been covering baseball 15 years now. I sound like a grizzled veteran, and maybe I am at this point. This is an entertainment business. Are you entertaining? And you can answer this question for all these various components, whether that's in what you're willing to say and talk about publicly, whether that's how the game is played on the field. I think baseball as an overall, as a monolith, lost sight of that for a long time, at least on a micro level. And I'll give the commissioner's office some credit. There's a lot of things to beat up the commissioner's office about. They do seem to be thinking more on that macro level of, all right, forget it. The general managers, they don't care if the game is entertaining. Somebody has to. And somebody has to take steps to make it entertaining. So I'm far afield from your original question, but whether the answers are originally in English or translated into English 30 seconds later, that's not the question. The question is whether this person is interesting and makes somebody want to hear more from. I personally, because Ohtani's such a marvel, you kind of hang on every word the guy says. And it's almost, it's like, it's the mystery part of it, because he doesn't say much, right? He doesn't reveal much about himself. You don't know much about him. At least I don't. Maybe some others do, but I'm not following every word, but what I do and see, it's just, man, I'd like to know more about that guy. And maybe there's a little advantage in a bit of mystery sometimes.
I think, Evan, kind of one of the themes of what you're talking about, what we've been talking about since we began here, is the sense that, at least for a long period of time, maybe the last 25 years or so, baseball ceased to be America's pastime, right? I mean, baseball had been always referred to as America's pastime, a sport at the center of American culture. And as the ratings declined in comparison to other sports, as the stars receded from the spotlight, baseball might have lost that. I remember commenting that in the age of Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa, they were the big stars on all of the magazine covers. And if there was someone then doing what Ohtani is doing now, he would be the most famous person in the country, because baseball did feel so central to American life at that time. And it hasn't the last few years. Baseball have taken these dramatic changes to try to get back to that. And I kind of wonder about what we lose as a country and as a culture when baseball in particular isn't at the center of American life. There's certain unifying moments that we can remember that had to do with baseball. Obviously, Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier is considered a moment not just in sports history, but in American history. President Taft was the founder of the seventh inning stretch. And there's a presidential connection. Certainly George W. Bush throwing the pitch at Yankee Stadium after 9/11. We can get these unifying moments through other sports. The Super Bowl is the most watched event every year. Everyone remembers LeBron James winning a championship for Cleveland. But does baseball have any particular characteristics that make it more important or important in a different way to American life than these other sports? Like, what do we lose when it's something else and not baseball?
I think separate of baseball, just as a generality, the unifying moments, period, are disappearing. And this is a function of, it used to be, well, you had your 3 or 4 major television networks, and that's what everybody gathered around to watch. You had your radio set to whatever station, and that's what everybody listened to. And that was it, right? It was the absence of choices that it kind of, for better or worse, and you can argue in both ways, and certainly there are arguments for worse, kind of pigeonholed you into having the same experience as everybody else was having that night. There wasn't as much going on. You didn't have the little computer on your phone where you could pull up Netflix or Prime or whatever the heck you want to watch, right? And so we're all living these kind of more disparate experiences now, I think. And there's really interesting conversations to be had about the effects of that. And I wonder if it could be more isolating for people as contributing to the sense of isolation that people do seem to be increasingly having. Maybe that's a post-pandemic world thing.
I've got an example that I wanted to share that's just in line with what you're talking about. There was an episode of MASH, the final episode of MASH in 1983, that got 121 million viewers live. You can't imagine that happening. I mean, the highest shows on television now, it's like 10 million. I mean, that's a unifying moment that we've lost. I mean, it's not even possible for something to have that kind of cultural reach.
Right. And so in a way, I think the question exists beyond baseball. Now, it sounds to me like basically what you're asking is a spiritual question: is if baseball is not at the center, is that more important, or do we lose something more than losing something else that also would have been, is not having baseball at the center more upsetting or damaging or than not having MASH at the center? This is a green grass and hot dogs question, as I like to. I think for a lot of people, baseball remains an important part of their lives. Even if the way they consume it is different. Maybe you're watching the highlights now rather than sitting down watching the game. I certainly remember calling my friends who were all watching the same game during the World Series, and like the World Series still brings some people in. I think to me, it's is there something sad about losing any unifying experience? I think baseball still exists for many people. It is still shared by many people. People predicted his death for a long time. And I'm not saying that we should forever ignore predictions of death because past predictions have been wrong. Well, one of them could be right eventually. I don't think that's in any way imminent. But yeah, look, baseball spiritually has always held a special place in the fabric of the country. I don't think most people would disagree with that. Is it harder to hold that place when you're not being watched as much? Yeah, probably. Football is the most popular sport in America. Baseball, you could still argue, is the national pastime. But that's the philosophical debate that you guys can have on Reddit. And I love Reddit. I'm on Reddit all the time.
I love Reddit too. I did an AMA on our politics, but that is for another time. So Evan, you're striking what I like. I feel it's a gloomy tone, right? Baseball is a team sport. It's more difficult to market these players. There's some TV issues ahead that don't really have any solutions necessarily that are clear cut. While the attendance is up, there are still more changes that baseball potentially should be considering to strengthen the sport. But I wanted to get your take on the simple fact that football causes CTE. Parents are not letting their kids play youth football for good reason. I will not let my kids play. And baseball, youth sports seems to be at a relatively stable level. So is there any hope to be had in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, look, just because you won't let your kids play, it doesn't mean you're not going to sit down on Sunday and watch it, right? A lot of parents don't let their kids participate in UFC, but but they're still going to watch it. I'm not somebody who thinks that baseball is in this hopeless situation, at least not in anything in the near term. I think there are some troubling trends of whether it's the television landscape and just the wide availability of alternative forms of entertainment. it's going to get harder and harder. And I think it is probably a little easier for the NBA and the NFL than for baseball going forward. I don't think those things are me going out on a limb. The commissioner's office, MLB, touts that they have done a lot on the youth front. It's a little hard to evaluate. I'm sure they have made some strides. Have they really returned stickball to every street corner in New York City? I don't know. I don't think that's coming back, but I think there's kind of a level-headed way to approach it, which is there's room to improve. They've probably made some improvements, and sport's not disappearing tomorrow. There's probably some things they could do better. I don't get too riled up by the baseball is dying thing. I do know for me personally, I don't watch games as much as I used to, but I think that's a more layered thing as somebody who has spent a lot of his life going to baseball games, watching baseball games, a lot of time with baseball. It might just be that I'm at a stage of life where I'm just living my life a little differently, right? So it's a little hard for me to understand exactly everyone else's mindset, but I'm listening.
I mean, we started off this discussion on such a positive note about what baseball has done and the impact that it's had. And, we can talk, as we have been, about the struggles that baseball has been having for 25 years or so, and also about the challenges that are impacting everyone in media and entertainment, which have to do with the decline of linear TV viewing and everything. But there's also this amazing story about how baseball did see a problem and took very drastic, quite disruptive, at least on paper, measures to address it, and have actually seen an impact. And that's something that we probably haven't really observed in a lot of the other sports, and certainly not among many other media or entertainment enterprises.
Well, you've seen rule changes in the other sports. I just don't think they've been quite as dramatic. I don't think people care as much. If you're changing a rule in baseball, right? This goes back to the question you're asking earlier about, why are we asking if baseball is not a centrally watched thing, if that's more important? It's because of this ingrained sense that baseball carries a greater weight. And I think that is true. And again, the difference between starting the conversation on a positive note, I am not somebody who's of the doom and gloom that baseball is at its demise. I'm really not. I think there is room to improve. I do think the willingness to change is something, and to change effectively. I wrote a book about the Astros, the Houston Astros, and it's a management culture book. I'm a baseball writer who ended up writing a management culture book. And a lot of it is about change management, how difficult change is and how it can really go awry. I would say in many ways it went well in Houston, in many ways it went poorly. Major League Baseball has had a lot of change as well, and some of it has gone poorly. In the case of these on-field rules, it's mostly gone well. And you do have to hand it to them for all the things you want to complain about as fans in baseball, and there are many, when they do something right, you should be able to turn around and say, hey, you guys did something right here. And there's one interesting point on fandom I want to share real quick. The MLB has done these studies, or groups MLB have worked with has done these studies, that people are fans when they're kids, and then when they get into 20s, 30s, 40s, and kind of real life takes over, they slink away. And then they come back to baseball when they have more time, more disposable income later in life, maybe as they're approaching retirement, kids have moved out, they're living on their own, that type of thing. And the chart they have for MLB is different than the other sports. This is the only sport that shows this curve. And I do think that's interesting, right? Like if we're going to assume that is true, that this information is accurate, it explains a bit of why we always have this cycle of, wow, I don't love baseball the way I did when I was a kid. It's just going to keep happening every generation. I'm not saying you don't get concerned then about issues in the game, but it is an interesting way of thinking about baseball, is that there's always going to be this built-in, not exodus from it, but people turn away from the game for a little bit at certain ages, and then they come back to it. And it's just an interesting way to think about it, I think.
We go to a game, and I see young people. I legitimately see young people at the Orioles, at the Nationals. I'm talking I'm in my, I guess you could say, early 30s, and I see people younger than me there, 18, 19, 20, Gen Zers. There's also a bunch of millennials. I think baseball, probably a made up stat by Commissioner Manfred, but their stat was that their average viewing and attendance demographic went down 3 years. I don't know how you find that statistic. But that is to say, all of my friends in Boston, like John, or in San Diego, they're all making comments that the crowd feels younger. It feels like a different vibe. And we see the attendance is up, and we see the TV ratings are up it feels like for the first time in 25 years, despite the market being saturated with streaming services like Amazon Prime, like Apple, like Netflix, despite a generation basically growing up on streaming services. These young people appear to be turning to a game that, instead of watching a movie, you're going and fostering a sense of community out on a Sunday afternoon in the summer when there's nothing else to do. Do we just think that this is a momentary blip where the game made these major changes? It's going to have an uptick in popularity for this year and then continue its decline?
This is basically the question I asked Manfred at the reelection in so many words. My question was something like, "Do you think it's proven?" Right? We're halfway through. Do you think that the new rules and the effect of the new rules are proven? And his answer was, look at all these numbers, and I think it's more than just the rules. And so I don't see a reason to sit here now and go, well, this is going to turn down, and this is going to drop off, and this is going to drop off. You could ask a question about, well, post-pandemic, did you expect a little bit of a push and a rise in attendance? That could be a little part of it. I think the answer will be, let's see what next year brings in the year after. There's absolutely reason for optimism. There's still these big questions that have to be like separate of this. I guess what I'm saying is this is not a singular discussion. It's not, okay, the rules are working, fans are showing renewed interest. Well, you still got to answer this TV question. How are you going to get the games to people when they want them, where they want them? And that's probably going to be the most interesting thing about the end of, that of the next lockout. But, Rob Manfred has got another 4 or 5 years left here. Actually, 5 years. And sorting out what the television model looks like, the distribution model, that's going to be a very interesting question. But if you as a fan of baseball are feeling good about the rules, feel good. You're allowed to feel good. Feel good. I'm not, I hope it's not coming up. I'm saying don't feel good. Feel good. It's good to feel good, guys.
Justin was going to leave this conversation so upset. He wants that boosterism.
I wasn't being too down on it, right? I think I'm just kind of being kind of mellow about it. I mean, that's my honest answer. I think there's improvement. I am not somebody in general who kind of works in like these huge declaratives of like, the game is saved, the game is dying. It's just more complicated than that in my head. But yeah, you want to feel good. I
mean, we're still, like you said, we're still in the first year, so we're not really ready to close the book on.
See how it builds. Yeah.
On this chapter. Yeah.
I don't see any reason to be like, this guy, the BABIP on these rules, the BABIP's 400 and, that's clearly going to drop. That's not what's going on.
I mean, just because you want the slower game doesn't mean the other fans do.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I know. I was very clear about that, right? That this is just me with my attention span.
We go into these nuanced discussions that we have, but I am very declarative, Evan. And when I want something to be a way, I will push to make it that way. I think that the word of mouth marketing, though, and we'll end on this, I think that the word of mouth marketing is really important. And I think that year one is great because it has all this hype, but the rules, it's not like it's all hat and no cattle. The rules are actually really good from my perspective and people that I've spoken to. So they're going to bring their friends to games. Tickets are cheap because there's infinite number of baseball games a year, unlike football, right? So that's another advantage. The teams can do like the Red Sox do, $9 tickets for college students to bring in that younger demographic. So there are a lot of inherent structural advantages that the sport has built in relative to the NBA and NFL, even though we've focused on some of those negative structural things. But I did want to just ask one question about baseball expansion and how Rob Manfred is condoning, enabling, letting happen what is happening in Oakland. So for our listeners, there's a baseball called Major League, which is with Charlie Sheen. It's a story about a greedy owner who refuses to invest in the team. They try and create a loser so that the attendance dives, and then that team can have the financial wherewithal and ability to make the argument that they need to move to a new location. Well, this is literally happening in real life, to the point where the owner of the Oakland Athletics is basically flipping the fans off with the middle finger. The fans are creating reverse boycott games where instead of not going to the game, they are going to show up and try and sell out the arena. And after the first one of these games, the Oakland A's owner has decided to raise ticket prices on the next reverse boycott game to kind of take control and try and milk the passion of the fans that are very heartbroken over this guy who's been basically abusing them for years now, and his desire to move the team from Oakland to Las Vegas. As a result, Rob Manfred, the commissioner, has been asked questions about this, and he's basically said, well, the Oakland fans can go fuck themselves. This owner is going to move the team, and I'm going to support this owner. So can you just give us some type of understanding about how Rob Manfred views the relationship that he has with owners, and if he truly does believe that it is his job to protect the owners, no matter how bad they abuse the fans, no matter how bad they try and milk an area out of tax revenue, and truly ruin a cultural institution that has been around for 5-6 decades.
Multiple times, once in an interview with me, maybe in other places, he did it in court as well. Manfred has described himself as the CEO of Major League Baseball. That is what the role is. That is what the role really has been for a very long time. What fans want the role to be is something much more idealistic, and what the role kind of arguably was at its very inception, back when you had Kennesaw Mountain Landis, first one who had this, he demanded to have basically total power to take over, and his charge was cleaning up the sport after the Black Sox scandal, where the White Sox were gambling on the sport. The famous 8 men out, guys get thrown out of the sport for good. That's Landis. But, post Landis, to different levels of competency, the commissioner ends up working for the owners. It does not, and sometimes what is the best interest of baseball and maybe the fans is also in the interest of the owners. Maybe that's even often, depending on how you want to look at it and define it. But yeah, Rob Manfred keeps getting extensions because he makes the owners money. How do you make the owners money? Well, one way is to help extract as much public money as you can. Stadium subsidies are a way of defraying the cost of owners. MLB does want to expand. They want to go from 30 to 32 teams. This is kind of self-inflicted, but it makes some sense. MLB has said, we're not going to do this until we get the stadium situation settled with Oakland and with the Tampa Bay Rays. So, having another option in Vegas crop up and pushing forward with that, well, theoretically, that pushes you closer to expansion, which is a windfall for the owners. When you have an expansion, whoever creates this new team in whatever city pays a lot of money. That money goes to the owners. So there's a windfall that comes there. And I do think there is a real sense inside the A's and inside the commissioner's office, rightly or wrongly, but this is what they put forth, that they tried for years and years and years in Oakland to get a deal, and Oakland just wouldn't play ball. Oakland's the city of, the mayor of, certainly has its own and a different version of events than that. This is not entirely a done deal. There is a group of owners that are now going to review the relocation, and there are big market owners in particular who don't really want a team going to a market like Oakland, where they're going to be a perpetual revenue sharing recipient. It's another team that they're going to have to prop up. They're leaving a market in Oakland that's large, that's established. So we'll see. It seems to me likely that they'll end up there. It would be quite a reversal if they didn't, but it's not impossible that the owners on this committee would look around and go, you know what, this is not good for us. This is not where the sport wants to go, wants to be. I don't know how to handicap it. I think it's unlikely, but I don't think it's impossible according to, some conversations I've had. But sometimes people can want that perception out there too. And this is where covering the off the field of baseball is a lot like covering politics. You're constantly evaluating. Are you being told something because somebody wants something out there, because it has real merit? And, I get tired easily and take a lot of naps, and it's hard to pay attention to baseball games. So,
Evan, I've got a very closely related question that I want to ask while we still have a little bit more time. It's a topic that we've covered on the program before. State wealth funds, especially in the Arab Gulf states like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar. They've been investing in global sports, to some extent in the United States with the LIV initiative, also in the UK, in their own domestic leagues. How would Rob Manfred and the MLB owners feel about the idea of a state wealth fund buying a team in the MLB?
I think probably they would be well aware of the issues, and I think they probably would listen. One of the things I went through reporting on my book about the Astros is researching the sale of the Astros to the current owner, Jim Crane, and just the process of Major League Baseball teams getting sold. And kind of unsurprisingly for a group of billionaires, the thing that matters most at the end of the day is purchase price. And there is a sense of obligation amongst all the owners to each other to make sure that that purchase price is basically as high as it can be. Because when the time comes that you want to sell or your kid wants to sell, that's what you're going to want to. And, I don't have an official answer for you on that. And I don't know that they would have an official answer on it at this point. But if the money were so much, you're going to have a hard time telling the owners no. But, the league is also highly sensitive to PR, as they should be, in a very, very forward-facing industry and entertainment industry where you need people to not have boycotts and things of this nature. So probably at some point it will be an inevitable collision of these two things. I don't know what direction it goes, but it does feel like someday that's going to happen, right? Someday we're going to be this will be a public discussion because it's brewing in some capacity or another. And at the end of the day, the owners and the commissioner's office control this. There's no public vote except to the extent that you want to hurt their bottom line or draw so much negative attention to them that you would deter them from doing it. And, John Fisher hasn't been stopped and he's gotten a lot of negative attention. So what does that? I don't know.
That's what I was going to say. I was going to say, if they're letting John Fisher and the Oakland Athletics screw over a loyal fan base, then they won't have any problems for taking billions and billions and billions of dollars from, Qatar, UAE, Saudi Arabia, somewhere like that.
I cover a lot of labor stuff, theoretically business of baseball. I'm not writing about like sponsorships, but it's a lot of business side stories, off the field stories. And the vast majority of stories I could probably start or at least end with, it's about money. And it's sometimes it's a little boring, but that's always the answer. And it can be very intuitive, or at least it's a very rare exception where that is not the answer. It can be a little unstimulating in a way at times, but it's the politics of baseball. What are politics often about? I don't know. You guys cover the politics. You tell me.